Iraqis are praying in Aramaic, the language Jesus is believed to have spoken. Many in this congregation are survivors of a horrifying attack thousands of kilometers away. In October 2010, Baghdad's Sayyidat al-Najat Cathedral was targeted. Rector Raphael Kutaimi was one of those who escaped.
It was on a Sunday. Prayer had just begun. After reading the Psalms, we heard a car bomb go off at the entrance of the church. 5 armed men came in and started shooting. They killed 45 people, including a baby who was only about 4 months old. The attackers were there for 4 hours, killing. Anyone who moved or asked a question was shot. All 5 of them blew themselves up in the church. During all that time, the Iraqi army surrounded the building but didn't launch an assault. We heard US military helicopters overhead. After 4 hours, the Iraqi army finally entered with rescue crews.
وبعد مضي 4 ساعات دخل الجيش العراقي والإسعاف.
We were taken to hospital. They took away our wounded and our dead, those we consider our martyrs.
The rector himself sustained a shrapnel wound, but still managed to save a group of worshippers, hiding them in the sacristy. After the attack, the wounded were evacuated to France. Some of them severely injured and traumatized. This deadly attack sent shockwaves around the world, shining a spotlight on the plight of Christians in the Middle East. The persecution of Christians has grown to be associated with Muslim-dominated countries. Some say the rise of this phenomenon is alarming. Others downplay it, saying there's strong evidence the two religions can live peacefully side by side.
المسلمون في العالم يعيشون نوع من
Some Muslims around the world have a certain kind of hatred towards the Western world. They believe it's harmed them.
وفي نظرهم أن العالم الغربي عالم مسيحي.
For them, the West means Christianity. And so they think Christians who live among them are allied with the West. It's a mentality which has existed since the Middle Ages.
In countries which practice Sharia law, persecution or discrimination against Christians is legal. And it's not the doing of terrorist groups, it's been organized by the state. In Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, someone who leaves Islam and becomes a Christian can be put to death by the state under state law.
It's grossly exaggerated. Most Christians who've lived amongst Muslims say that it's been a peaceful cohabitation.
When will it be too much? Our churches are being burned and we are denouncing it. That's an exaggeration?
Huge questions remain divisive. Where would such persecution spring from? Could the blame be laid at the feet of Muslim clerics who preach hatred, or on extreme interpretations of the Quran?
I'm the first to say to Muslim leaders who are my brothers and friends, how can you find violence among the verses of the Quran?
In our Quran it says, when someone injures you, reciprocate proportionally, according to the harm caused. This is the principle of justice. If you attack me, what should I do?
Those who choose extremism, who take a verse from the Quran that talks about fighting for justice and apply that to Christians, are themselves unjust. History shows us we've lived alongside Christians for 14 centuries.
We need our enlightened Muslim friends to deliver intelligent interpretations of the verses of the Quran, which are used to explosive effect by extremists. If we could contextualize them by showing them as products of the historical place and time, then we could very well use them to fight fanaticism. This is the kind of thing we're lacking these days. Many imams don't dare for fear of being labelled traitors to their faith.
We need all those with the conscience to express their revulsion and anger at these acts, which are attributed to Islam. We must protect the blood, property and honour of Christians and Jews who live among Muslims.
We should have the right to criticize Islam, only if we don't attack its religious sentiment or the faith of its believers. I'll take a very specific example. As a Catholic priest, I was shocked by the edition of the magazine Charlie Hebdo in France. I found the inside page that featured cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad was gratuitous. That wasn't humour, it wasn't funny, it just hurt the deeply religious feelings of believers.
In several Muslim countries, anger erupted over caricatures depicting the Prophet Muhammad, which many consider Western provocation.
These acts, these caricatures were wrong, and they reflected badly on us in the East. Unfortunately, some Muslims, or rather terrorists, believe that we're involved in these acts and have been taking revenge on Christians in the Middle East.
This is just an expression of deep hatred towards Islam and its followers. Who benefits from these drawings? All it does is sow distrust and discord between Muslims and others.
There are many Muslims who insult Jews, Christians and the Pope night and day. They say Christians are stupid because of the Holy Trinity, but it's their belief.
What bothers me is how we're treated by countries like the US, where there was that film against Islam, for example. These countries are trying to ban the niqab, or the veil in public, and ban minarets. Then there are laws against anti-Semitism at the same time. Where's the justice in that? That's what bothers me.
What's certain is that much of the media coverage encourages fears of others, maybe even hatred.
The caricatures weren't the only perceived insult of recent times. Pope Benedict's Regensburg lecture in 2006 sparked outrage. He quoted works linking Islam with violence and evil. Action by Islamophobic groups has stirred up tensions too, like these far-right activists occupying building works at a new mosque in Poitiers, western France. The town was the site of an ancient victory when 8th century Christians triumphed against Muslims. Historical tensions often seem to mar sensitive interfaith relations.
A Christian, whether he attends church or not, simply by being from a Christian family, is associated with the Crusades, with imperialism, Zionist Jews, allies of the imperialist Americans, etc.
That's not quite right. That's like saying we blame Christians today for what was done by Christians during the Crusades. And you have to take into account that the Crusades did them more harm than good.
We don't have anything to do with the Crusades. Perhaps this interpretation does exist, a revenge on the Crusaders, but why? We don't have any links with the Crusaders.
For some, the spectre of religious war does exist in the modern world, especially after 9/11. George Bush used an unhappy choice of words when declaring his war on terror.
We understand. And the American people are beginning to understand. Now, this crusade, this war on terrorism, is going to take a while, and the American people must be patient.
2 years after 9/11, Bush sent US troops into Iraq to fight what he branded the axis of evil.
Mr. Bush, by presenting himself as a Christian crusader, reforged the link between Christianity, imperialism, and colonization.
If it was a religious war, wouldn't he have prepared a group of missionaries to convert the Iraqis? Or was he actually trying to make the Christians flee from Iraq? Under Saddam Hussein, Christians were 1,000 times better off than under the US occupation. There were about 1 million there. Now there are no more than 300,000.
The persecution of Christians in Iraq began before the 2003 invasion, in fact even before 1990.
It was a political war. It was a struggle for influence and power. They didn't treat us well. They brought a great deal of trouble for us. It was hard for both Christians and Muslims, unfortunately.
A decade after the Second Gulf War, the Arab world has been convulsed by a wave of revolutions, and Islamists are riding that wave to power. In Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood has the presidency and took control of parliament.
A number of Copts have opted for a kind of tactical partnership with the Muslim Brotherhood in order to be spared persecution. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. Lebanese Maronite Christians will tell you it's a miscalculation.
The civil war in Lebanon is a vivid and extremely bloody example of how different faiths living side by side can prove to be a tinderbox. Political battles along religious lines ignited 15 years of civil war.
During the war in Lebanon, some Christians used the slogan, "Take up your cross and follow me," and this wasn't an isolated incident.
Lebanon is a model apart. All faiths carry weight. In the end, after a civil war between religious groups, we arrived at a partnership, a deal called the Taif Agreement. In my opinion, this accord, if applied, provides the best form of justice for everyone.
But for Muslims and Christians in the Levant, cohabiting has a long and troubled history. The region has been marked by conflicts for centuries, although there have been moments of unity, such as when Muslim leader Emir Abdel Kader protected Christians from Druze attacks back in the 1860s. Today, again, Christians in Syria are facing an uncertain future, caught between increasingly radical Sunni rebels and a regime backed up by Shia allies.
We Sunnis suffer from the injustice of the Iranian system here, and we are a majority. I advise Muslims to resist and stay in the region. Christians should resist the system too. They shouldn't just leave because they're suffering from some acts of persecution or injustice.
I've been told there have been population movements in Syria recently which could result in a situation where Christians and Muslims no longer live in the same neighborhood or even in the same region.
When you join one side and you fight for it and give it your support, then your fate is tied to that side. That's normal and obvious. The question is, why do the Christians choose to be on the side of the oppressor and against the oppressed? We ask the question.
The threat against Christians in Syria has been manipulated by some groups allied to the regime to try and gain support. It's not 100% true.
The Syrian regime continues to resist the revolutions which have swept the Arab world, a world which is still searching for a political model. Many Christians are living in fear of the future.
I tell everyone that Islamic states are inevitable. Many people believe that democracy is a form of freedom of expression. Not at all. In fact, it gives the power to make laws to the people instead of God. As for Islam, it's the power of God over men, not the rule of men over men.
Religious conservatives, especially Salafists, have a preference for ancient Islam. They don't adhere to modern Islamic thought.
Do not worry, when a Muslim takes power, he rules with divine revelation. He is not governed by desire, he is not a fanatic.
Whatever the outcome of the war, many Syrians have chosen to flee to neighbouring countries. Among them, an exodus of Christians. A sign, perhaps, that living alongside Muslims in the Syria of the future could prove impossible.
It's in the interest of Muslims for Christians to stay in the region. People only have to say that Christians are threatened by Muslims and can't coexist in order for the image of Islam to be tarnished.
Some extremists may think that the way forward is clear like that. Instead, they're giving their opponents the opportunity to attack them.
Look, this terrorism doesn't scare us. We're Iraqis. Our parents and our grandparents were raised on this land. We lived in peace and love alongside our Muslim brothers.
But Father Raphael has chosen exile. He's fled to France. Surrounded by members of his community, he continues to preach as he did in Iraq.
They can try and disperse us all over the world, but we remain Christians. Heaven help us if we lose our faith and love of God. We should not be afraid of those who kill, persecute and attack us. Jesus is more powerful than anything.
The survivors of the 2010 church attack in Baghdad have moved thousands of kilometers, carrying painful memories with them. They hope to go home someday if they can live in an Iraq free of hate. Christians represented some 20% of the Middle East population at the start of the 20th century. Today, they're just 2%.